The USS Charleston sat motionless in the Pacific Ocean, her massive engines silent for the third day straight. What started as a routine training mission had turned into a nightmare for Captain Rodriguez and his crew of 300 sailors. The ship's main propulsion system had suddenly shut down without warning, leaving the destroyer dead in the water. Chief Engineer Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead as he climbed out of the engine room for the 5th time that morning. His white uniform was stained with grease and oil, evidence of hours spent crawling through tight spaces and checking every bolt, wire, and connection he could find. The problem seemed impossible to locate, let alone fix. "Any luck down there, Chief?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his voice heavy with concern. The captain had been pacing the bridge for hours, fielding calls from Naval Command who wanted answers he simply didn't have. Thompson shook his head slowly. "Sir, I've been working on ship engines for 22 years and I've never seen anything like this. The fuel system checks out perfectly. All the electrical connections are solid. The computer diagnostics show everything is working fine, but the engines won't even attempt to turn over." The situation was becoming more serious by the hour. The ship was drifting toward international waters where tensions with foreign navies had been running high. Without power, they couldn't defend themselves or return to port. Worse yet, a storm system was approaching from the east, and being caught in rough seas without engine power could be catastrophic. Word of the crisis had reached the highest levels of Naval Command. Admiral Patterson, a veteran of 30 years who had seen his share of mechanical failures, was personally monitoring the situation from his office in San Diego. He had already dispatched 2 of the Navy's top engineering specialists by helicopter, but even they were baffled by the mysterious malfunction. Dr. Sarah Chen, a civilian contractor with a PhD in marine engineering, had spent 6 hours examining every system on the ship. Her electronic diagnostic equipment, worth more than most people's houses, showed that everything was functioning normally. Yet the engines remained stubbornly silent. "I've run every test in the book," she told the captain during an emergency meeting in his quarters. "The fuel injectors are clean, the compression ratios are perfect, and the timing sequences are exactly where they should be. According to every measurement I can take, these engines should be running like a dream." Lieutenant Johnson, the ship's communications officer, had been in constant contact with other vessels in the fleet, hoping someone else had encountered a similar problem. But the responses were all the same. Nothing like this had ever been reported before. As night fell on the 3rd day, the crew was growing restless. Rumors were spreading through the ship faster than the captain could control them. Some sailors whispered about sabotage, while others wondered if they had encountered some kind of new electronic warfare system that could disable ships remotely. The storm clouds on the horizon were getting darker and more threatening. Weather reports indicated that within 12 hours, they would be facing waves over 20 feet high and winds approaching 60 miles per hour. In their current condition, the USS Charleston would be completely at the mercy of the storm. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge, staring out at the calm seas that would soon turn violent. He had commanded ships through combat zones and natural disasters, but he had never felt as helpless as he did at this moment. His ship was one of the most advanced destroyers in the fleet, equipped with cutting-edge technology and maintained by the best engineers in the Navy. Yet here they sat, defeated by a problem that no one could even identify, let alone solve. The radio crackled to life with another call from Admiral Patterson. "Charleston, this is Admiral Patterson. What's your current status?" "Still dead in the water, Admiral," the captain replied. "Our engineering teams have exhausted every possibility they can think of. We're going to need that storm to change course, or we're going to be in serious trouble by tomorrow morning." There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. His voice carried a weight that suggested he was considering options that went far beyond standard Navy procedures. "Captain, I'm going to try something unconventional. Stand by for further orders." As the captain hung up the radio, he wondered what the Admiral could possibly have in mind that hadn't already been attempted. Little did he know that hundreds of miles away, Admiral Patterson was about to make a decision that would surprise everyone involved, including himself. Admiral Patterson sat alone in his office, surrounded by technical manuals and reports from the Charleston. The dim light from his desk lamp cast long shadows across the pages covered in engine diagrams and diagnostic data. Every expert he had consulted was stumped, and time was running out fast. His assistant, Commander Williams, knocked softly on the door before entering. Admiral, the meteorology department confirms that Storm Patricia will reach the Charleston's position by 0800 hours tomorrow. They're predicting sustained winds of 65 knots with gusts up to 80. The Admiral rubbed his tired eyes. He had been awake for nearly 36 hours straight, trying to find a solution to save his ship and crew. Any word from the engineering consultants? Sir, Professor Mitchell from MIT just submitted his analysis. He's as baffled as everyone else. His exact words were that the Charleston appears to be experiencing a mechanical impossibility. Admiral Patterson stood up and walked to the large window overlooking San Diego Harbor. Dozens of naval vessels were moored below, their lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there in the Pacific, 300 sailors were counting on him to find an answer that didn't seem to exist. Then, something stirred in his memory, a conversation from years ago, back when he was just a lieutenant commander serving on the USS Nevada. There had been an older man, a civilian contractor who had solved an engine problem that had stumped everyone else on the ship. The man had been quiet, methodical, and had approached the problem from an angle that no one else had considered. The Admiral walked back to his desk and began searching through old personnel files on his computer. He remembered the man's last name was Jackson, and that he had been a Navy veteran himself before becoming a civilian contractor. After 20 minutes of searching through database records, he found what he was looking for. Marcus Jackson, age 67, retired Navy Chief Petty Officer turned civilian Marine engineer. His service record showed tours on 12 different vessels over a 20-year career, with specializations in diesel engines and power systems. What caught the Admiral's attention were the commendations. Jackson had received recognition for solving mechanical problems that had baffled other engineers on multiple occasions, but there was, something else in Jackson's file that made the Admiral pause. Jackson was African American, and his service had begun in the 1970s when the Navy was still struggling with racial integration. Despite facing discrimination and limited opportunities for advancement, Jackson had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled engine specialists in the fleet. Commander Williams noticed the Admiral staring intently at his computer screen.
"Sir, have you found something?"
"Maybe," the Admiral replied slowly. "There's a man named Marcus Jackson who might be able to help us. He's retired Navy, currently working as an independent contractor. But Williams, I need you to understand something. This is going to be unconventional." The Admiral explained Jackson's background and his reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems. Commander Williams listened carefully, but his expression showed some concern. "Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't we be consulting with our top engineering schools and defense contractors? We have access to the most advanced diagnostic equipment and the brightest minds in naval engineering." Admiral Patterson was quiet for a long moment. He understood the commander's hesitation. In a crisis of this magnitude, protocol would normally dictate bringing in teams of experts with the latest technology and highest security clearances. Calling in a single retired petty officer seemed almost desperate. "Commander, sometimes the most sophisticated approach isn't the right approach. Jackson has something that our experts don't have. 30 years of hands-on experience with engines that break down in ways the manuals never anticipated." The Admiral pulled up Jackson's current contact information. According to the records, he was living in a small town in Alabama, running a marine repair shop that specialized in commercial fishing vessels and pleasure craft. It was a far cry from the high-tech naval facilities where the current crop of experts had trained. "Sir, what if he can't help either? We'll have lost valuable time that could have been spent on other solutions." Admiral Patterson stood up and reached for his phone. "Then we'll be in exactly the same position we're in now, except we'll know we tried everything. But Williams, I have a feeling about this man. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts." As the Admiral dialed Jackson's number, he wondered how a retired black Navy veteran living in rural Alabama would react to receiving a call from a 3-star admiral in the middle of the night. He also wondered if Jackson would even be willing to help, given the way the Navy had treated black sailors during much of his career. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Jackson Marine Repair, this is Marcus. Mr. Jackson, this is Admiral Patterson with the United States Navy. I apologize for calling so late, but we have an emergency situation, and I believe you might be able to help us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Admiral Patterson could almost hear the man processing the unexpected call and deciding whether it was some kind of prank. "Admiral," you said. "What kind of emergency are we talking about?" The Admiral quickly explained the situation with the Charleston, emphasizing the approaching storm and the failure of conventional experts to identify the problem. As he spoke, he could hear Jackson asking technical questions that demonstrated a deep understanding of naval engineering systems. "Admiral, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I haven't worked on a destroyer's engines in over 15 years. Surely you have younger engineers with more current experience." Admiral Patterson took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine whether his unconventional gamble would pay off. "Mr. Jackson, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We've had our best people working on this for 3 days and nobody can even figure out what's wrong, let alone fix it. I need someone who thinks differently, someone who's seen problems that the textbooks don't cover." "Will you help us?" Marcus Jackson stood in his small repair shop at 2:30 in the morning, still holding the phone and trying to process what he had just heard. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the engine parts scattered across his workbench. After hanging up with Admiral Patterson, he found himself staring at his hands, weathered and scarred from decades of working with mechanical systems that most people would never understand. The Admiral had been persuasive, but Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to step back into the world he had left behind 15 years ago. His retirement from the Navy had been bittersweet. While he was proud of his service, he also remembered the countless times he had been overlooked for promotions despite his expertise, and the subtle and not-so-subtle racism he had faced throughout his career. Marcus walked over to an old filing cabinet and pulled out a folder containing his Navy service records and commendations. Among the papers was a faded photograph of him standing next to the engine room of the USS Nevada, wearing his Chief Petty Officer uniform with pride. He had been one of the few black senior enlisted men in the engine department at that time, and he had worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove he belonged there. His wife, Dorothy, appeared in the doorway wearing her bathrobe and looking concerned. "Marcus, what's got you up so late?" "I heard the phone ring." Marcus showed her the photograph and explained the Admiral's call. Dorothy had been by his side through his entire Navy career, supporting him through the difficult times and celebrating his achievements when others wouldn't acknowledge them. She knew better than anyone what returning to that world might mean for him emotionally. "So they need your help now," she said with a mixture of pride and irony in her voice. "After all those times they passed you over for the younger white engineers, now they're calling you in the middle of the night because nobody else can solve their problem." Marcus nodded slowly. The irony wasn't lost on him either. But as he looked at the photograph, he remembered something else about his Navy service. The satisfaction he had felt every time he had brought a dead engine back to life, and the gratitude of sailors whose lives depended on those engines working properly. "Dorothy, there are 300 men and women on that ship. They're facing a storm that could kill them all if those engines don't start working. Whatever problems I had with the Navy, those sailors don't deserve to suffer for it." His wife smiled and put her hand on his shoulder. "I know you, Marcus Jackson. You were never able to walk away from someone who needed help, even when they didn't deserve it. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you 40 years ago." By 4 a.m., Marcus was packed and ready to leave. The Admiral had arranged for a military transport helicopter to pick him up at the regional airport and fly him to the nearest naval air station, where a jet would take him to the ship. As he gathered his tools, the same wrenches and diagnostic equipment he had used throughout his Navy career, he felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. The helicopter ride to the air station gave Marcus time to think about the technical challenges he might face. Based on the Admiral's description, the Charleston was experiencing a problem that defied conventional diagnosis. All the standard systems appeared to be functioning normally, yet the engines wouldn't start. In his experience, such problems usually involved factors that weren't covered in technical manuals. At the air station, Marcus was met by a young Navy lieutenant who seemed surprised by his appearance. The lieutenant had obviously been expecting someone different, perhaps a younger man in a business suit carrying high-tech equipment. Instead, he found a 67-year-old black man in work clothes carrying a battered toolbox. "Are you Mr. Jackson?" the lieutenant asked hesitantly. "Chief Petty Officer Jackson, retired," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Morrison, sir. I'm here to escort you to the aircraft." The young officer's demeanor quickly shifted to one of respect, when he realized he was dealing with a senior enlisted veteran. During the flight to the Charleston, Marcus reviewed technical specifications for the ship's engines that had been provided by Admiral Patterson's staff. The destroyer was equipped with 4 gas turbine engines, much more advanced than the diesel systems he had worked on during his active duty. However, the basic principles of internal combustion and power transmission remained the same. What troubled Marcus was the description of the symptoms. Complete engine failure with no identifiable cause was extremely rare, especially on a well-maintained naval vessel. In his experience, such problems usually resulted from multiple small issues that created a cascading failure, or from a single critical component that wasn't obvious to casual inspection. As the aircraft approached the Charleston, Marcus could see the ship floating motionless on the calm ocean. Dark storm clouds were visible on the horizon, confirming that time was running short. The sight of the disabled vessel brought back memories of his own experiences at sea, when mechanical failures could mean the difference between life and death. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln was positioned nearby, serving as a platform for helicopter operations. Marcus was transferred to a helicopter for the final leg of his journey to the Charleston. As they approached the destroyer, he could see sailors on deck looking up at them with expressions of hope and curiosity. Captain Rodriguez was waiting on the flight deck when Marcus landed. The captain had been briefed on Jackson's background, but like the lieutenant at the air station, he seemed somewhat taken aback by the appearance of his potential savior. "Mr. Jackson, welcome aboard the Charleston. I'm Captain Rodriguez. Admiral Patterson speaks very highly of your abilities." Marcus shook the captain's hand firmly. "Captain, I'm here to help however I can. But I want you to understand that I'm not promising miracles. I just approach problems differently than some people might expect." As they walked toward the engine room, Captain Rodriguez briefed Marcus on everything that had been tried so far. The list was impressive. Teams of experts with advanced diagnostic equipment had examined every system multiple times. Computer simulations had been run, components had been tested and retested, and theoretical models had been constructed to explain the failure. "Chief, I have to ask, do you really think you can find something that all these experts missed?" Marcus paused at the entrance to the engine room and smiled. "Captain, sometimes the problem isn't that the experts don't know enough. Sometimes the problem is that they know too much, and they forget to look at the simple things that can go wrong." As they descended into the engine room, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of entering the heart of a ship. The massive turbine engines loomed around them, silent and cold. For the first time in years, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Jackson was exactly where he belonged. Marcus Jackson stood in the engine room of the USS Charleston, taking in the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades troubleshooting mechanical problems. The space was immaculate, typical of a well-maintained naval vessel, but the silence was unnerving. These massive turbine engines should have been humming with power, yet they sat as quiet as museum pieces. Chief Engineer Thompson approached him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Thompson had been working non-stop for 3 days and was clearly frustrated by his inability to solve the problem. "Mr. Jackson, I've prepared a complete briefing on everything we've tested and checked. We have diagnostic printouts, system schematics, and detailed reports from all the specialists who have examined the engines." Marcus held up his hand politely. "Chief, I appreciate all the work you've done, but I'd like to start fresh. Sometimes when you've been staring at a problem too long, you can miss things that would be obvious to someone seeing it for the first time." Thompson's expression showed some irritation. He had been hoping that Jackson would review their findings and quickly identify what they had missed. Starting over seemed like a waste of precious time, especially with the storm approaching. "Sir, with all due respect, we've been very thorough. Dr. Chen ran complete diagnostics on all systems, and Professor Mitchell verified our findings independently. I'm not sure what else there is to check." Marcus knelt down next to one of the turbine engines and opened his toolbox. The tools inside were old but well-maintained. Wrenches, gauges, and measuring devices that had served him faithfully for decades. "Chief, tell me about the last time these engines ran normally." 4 days ago during routine operations. Everything was running perfectly until we shut down for a scheduled maintenance check. When we tried to restart the next morning, nothing happened. Marcus nodded and began his inspection at the most basic level. While the previous experts had relied heavily on computer diagnostics and electronic testing equipment, Marcus started with his eyes, ears, and hands. He examined fuel lines for any signs of leaks or blockages. He checked electrical connections for corrosion or loose fittings. He looked for any physical damage that might not show up on electronic tests. Dr. Chen, who had remained on board to assist with any further technical analysis, watched Marcus work with obvious skepticism. Her advanced diagnostic equipment had cost more than most people earned in a year, and it had shown conclusively that all systems were functioning normally. "Mr. Jackson, I've already tested all of those connections with precision instruments. The electrical continuity is perfect, and the fuel system pressure is exactly where it should be." Marcus continued his methodical examination without looking up. "Ma'am, I'm not questioning your work, but sometimes instruments can tell you that everything looks right on paper, while missing something that's actually wrong in reality." As Marcus worked, he began to notice small details that the other experts had overlooked. The fuel lines were indeed properly pressurized, but the fuel itself had a slightly unusual smell. The electrical connections tested fine with electronic equipment, but some of them felt slightly loose when he physically wiggled them with his hands. Most importantly, Marcus noticed that the engine bay was unusually clean. Naval engine rooms were normally kept very clean, but this one seemed to have been scrubbed more thoroughly than usual. When he mentioned this observation, Chief Thompson explained that they had performed extra cleaning during the maintenance period. "We wanted everything to be spotless for the inspection next week," Thompson said. "We used some new industrial cleaning solvents that were supposed to be more effective than our usual products." Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked up with interest. "Tell me more about these cleaning solvents. What exactly did you clean and how did you apply them?" Dr. Chen looked puzzled by this line of questioning. "I don't see how cleaning products could affect engine performance. The engines were thoroughly dried and aired out before any restart attempts." But Marcus had encountered problems with cleaning solvents before, particularly on older ships where new products sometimes reacted unexpectedly with existing systems. He asked Chief Thompson to show him the containers of cleaning products that had been used, and to walk him through exactly what had been cleaned and how. The cleaning had been extensive. Fuel lines, electrical conduits, sensor housings, and even some internal engine components had been scrubbed with the new solvents. The products were military approved and had been tested for compatibility with all standard naval equipment. However, Marcus noticed something in the fine print of the product specifications that everyone else had missed. "Chief, look at this warning label. It says this solvent can leave an invisible residue that interferes with certain types of electronic sensors, but only under specific temperature and humidity conditions." Thompson examined the label more closely. "But we followed all the application instructions exactly, and the warning says the residue dissipates within 24 hours under normal conditions." Marcus was already pulling out a humidity gauge from his toolbox. The engine room's environmental controls maintained specific temperature and humidity levels, but he wanted to check the actual conditions rather than rely on the control system readings. Sometimes normal conditions don't match what you actually have in a ship's engine room, Marcus explained as he took readings throughout the space. What he found was revealing. While the temperature was within normal ranges, the humidity level was significantly higher than the cleaning solvent manufacturer had assumed when determining their dissipation timeline. The combination of high humidity and the enclosed environment of the engine room had caused the solvent residue to persist much longer than expected. Dr. Chen was now paying close attention to Marcus's investigation. "Are you suggesting that this residue is interfering with the engine sensors?" Marcus was already examining the engine control sensors with a small flashlight and magnifying glass. "More than that, I think the residue is creating false readings that are confusing the engine control computers. The sensors are telling the computer that conditions are normal, but the actual conditions are different enough to prevent the engines from starting." He pointed to several sensor housings that had been thoroughly cleaned with the new solvent. Under magnification, a barely visible film could be seen on the sensor surfaces. The film was so thin that electronic testing equipment couldn't detect it, and it was transparent enough that visual inspection had missed it entirely. "The computer thinks everything is perfect because the sensors are giving normal readings," Marcus explained. "But the sensors aren't reading the actual conditions. They're reading through this residue film that's acting like a filter." Chief Thompson looked amazed and embarrassed at the same time. So all this time we've had a cleaning product problem, not an engine problem? Marcus nodded. It's like trying to see clearly while wearing dirty glasses. Your eyes work fine, but the information they're getting isn't accurate. Marcus Jackson's discovery sent a wave of excitement through the engine room, but he quickly cautioned everyone that identifying the problem was only half the battle. The solvent residue needed to be completely removed from dozens of sensors throughout the engine system, and they had to do it correctly to avoid causing additional problems. Chief Thompson, we need to be very careful about how we clean these sensors, Marcus explained. If we use the wrong cleaning method, we could damage the sensors themselves, and then we'll have a much bigger problem than we started with. Dr. Chen was already pulling up technical specifications on her laptop. The sensor manufacturers should have specific cleaning procedures in their maintenance manuals. Let me find the exact protocols. While Dr. Chen researched the proper cleaning procedures, Marcus began carefully documenting which sensors showed signs of residue contamination. He used his magnifying glass and flashlight to examine each one, marking their locations on a diagram of the engine system that Chief Thompson provided. Captain Rodriguez arrived in the engine room after receiving word that a potential solution had been identified. The storm was now only 6 hours away, and the ship was already beginning to feel the effects of the approaching rough seas. Chief Jackson, please tell me we have a solution, the captain said, unable to hide the urgency in his voice. Marcus looked up from his inspection. Captain, we know what the problem is and it can be fixed, but it's going to take time to clean all the affected sensors properly, and we have to do it right the first time. If we rush and damage a sensor, we could be worse off than we are now. The captain nodded, understanding the dilemma. They had enough time to fix the problem carefully, but barely enough time to do it at all if they encountered any setbacks. Dr. Chen had found the cleaning protocols for the sensors and was printing them out. According to the manufacturer specifications, we need to use a specific type of electronic contact cleaner, applied with lint-free cloths in a particular pattern. Each sensor needs to be cleaned, dried, and tested individually before moving to the next one. Marcus studied the procedures and began organizing the work. We're going to divide into teams. Chief Thompson, you and your engine room crew will handle the fuel system sensors. Dr. Chen, you'll take the electronic control sensors since you're most familiar with their testing procedures. I'll work on the air intake and exhaust sensors. As the teams began working, Marcus demonstrated the proper cleaning technique on the first sensor. The contact cleaner had to be applied gently to avoid pushing the residue deeper into the sensor housing. Each sensor required several cleaning cycles, with careful drying between each application. Take your time with each one, Marcus instructed. It's better to spend an extra few minutes per sensor than to have to start over because we missed something. The work was painstaking and methodical. Each sensor had to be removed from its housing, cleaned multiple times, tested with electronic equipment to ensure proper function, and then reinstalled with precise calibration. Marcus moved between the teams, checking their work and offering guidance based on his decades of experience. With similar repairs, Chief Thompson's team encountered the first major challenge when they discovered that several fuel system sensors had residue buildup in areas that couldn't be reached. With standard cleaning cloths, Marcus examined the problem and devised a solution using thin wire wrapped with cloth to reach the contaminated areas. Sometimes you have to improvise, he told the young sailors working with him. The manual tells you the ideal way to do something, but real-world conditions don't always match the ideal. Dr. Chen's team was making steady progress with the electronic sensors, but she was frustrated by how long each sensor was taking to clean properly. Her advanced diagnostic equipment could immediately detect whether a sensor was functioning correctly, but the cleaning process itself couldn't be rushed. I've never had to clean sensors this thoroughly before, she admitted to Marcus. Usually a quick wipe down is sufficient for maintenance. Marcus smiled. Ma'am, most of the time a quick wipe down is all you need. But when you have a contamination problem like this, you have to be more thorough than usual. As the teams worked, the ship continued to experience increasing motion from the approaching storm. What had started as a gentle rolling motion was becoming more pronounced, making the delicate sensor cleaning work more difficult. The sailors had to brace themselves and their equipment to maintain steady hands while working on the tiny components. 3 hours into the repair process, they had successfully cleaned and tested about 60% of the contaminated sensors. Marcus was pleased with their progress, but he could see that everyone was getting tired, and tired technicians were more likely to make mistakes. "Let's take a 15-minute break," he announced. "Get some coffee, stretch your legs, and clear your heads. These last sensors are just as important as the first ones, and we need to maintain our focus." During the break, Captain Rodriguez updated Marcus on the storm's progress. The weather was deteriorating faster than predicted, and they now had less than 3 hours before conditions would become too dangerous for helicopter evacuation, if the engines still couldn't be started. "Chief, I need to ask you honestly, do you think we're going to make it?" Marcus looked around the engine room at the teams of sailors who had been working tirelessly to save their ship. "Captain, these people are doing excellent work and we're going to succeed. But I won't lie to you, it's going to be close." When work resumed, Marcus noticed that everyone was moving with renewed determination. The sailors understood the stakes, and they were pushing themselves to work as efficiently as possible without sacrificing quality. The final sensors were the most challenging, because they were located in hard-to-reach areas of the engine compartment. Marcus found himself crawling through tight spaces that would have been difficult for someone half his age, but his experience allowed him to work effectively even in awkward positions. Dr. Chen called out with excitement from across the engine room. "Marcus, I'm getting clean readings on all the electronic control sensors. The contamination appears to be completely cleared from this section." Chief Thompson's team finished with the fuel system sensors shortly afterward, and Marcus completed the air intake sensors just as the ship's motion was becoming noticeably more severe. They had successfully cleaned and tested all the contaminated sensors, but now came the moment of truth. Would the engines actually start? The engine room of the USS Charleston fell silent as Marcus Jackson made his final preparations for the restart attempt. Everyone who had worked on the sensor cleaning project was present, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion, anticipation, and nervous energy. Outside, the storm was growing stronger by the hour, and the ship's rolling motion was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Captain Rodriguez stood beside Marcus at the main engine control panel, his hand resting on the radio that would allow him to notify Admiral Patterson of their success or failure. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did at this moment, knowing that the lives of 300 crew members depended on the work that had been completed over the past several hours. "Chief Jackson, before we attempt the start sequence, I want you to know that regardless of the outcome, you've given us hope when we had none. Your approach to this problem has been unlike anything I've seen in my 20 years of naval service." Marcus nodded respectfully, but his attention was focused on the engine control displays. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts about mechanical systems, and something felt different now. The electronic readings that had been consistently normal but somehow wrong for the past 4 days now seemed to have a quality he couldn't quite describe. They felt authentic in a way they hadn't before. Dr. Chen was monitoring her diagnostic equipment, ready to detect any anomalies during the startup process. All systems are showing normal readings, and the sensor responses are consistent with what we should expect for a cold start after an extended shutdown period. Chief Thompson's engine room crew was positioned at various monitoring stations throughout the compartment. They had been through this startup sequence dozens of times over the past 4 days, but everyone could sense that this attempt was different. Marcus placed his hand on the main engine start control. "Captain, I want to start with just one engine initially. If we have any remaining problems, it's better to identify them on a single engine, rather than risk damaging all 4. The captain nodded his agreement. "Proceed when ready, Chief." Marcus initiated the start sequence for the number 1 turbine engine. The familiar sounds of fuel pumps engaging and ignition systems coming online filled the engine room. For a moment, everything seemed to be following the normal pattern, but then came the critical moment when the engine would either catch and spin up to operating speed, or fail just as it had dozens of times before. A low rumbling sound began to build from deep within the number 1 engine. Marcus held his breath as the sound gradually increased in pitch and volume. The electronic displays showed turbine speed climbing steadily. 1,000 RPM, 2,000 RPM, 3,000 RPM. "Engine 1 is coming up to speed," Chief Thompson called out, his voice filled with amazement and relief. "All parameters are normal. We have ignition, we have fuel flow, and we have power generation." The engine room erupted in cheers from the sailors who had worked so hard to make this moment possible. Captain Rodriguez grabbed Marcus's hand and shook it vigorously. "Chief, you've done it. You've actually done it." But Marcus wasn't ready to celebrate yet. "Captain, let's get all 4 engines running before we declare victory. 1 engine is good, but you need full power to handle that storm." Over the next 10 minutes, Marcus methodically started the remaining 3 engines. Each one came online smoothly, with all systems operating within normal parameters. The USS Charleston was alive again, her massive engines generating enough power to propel the destroyer through even the roughest seas. Captain Rodriguez immediately contacted the bridge to confirm that they had full propulsion power available. The navigation team quickly began plotting a course that would take them away from the storm's predicted path and toward the safety of calmer waters. Admiral Patterson's voice crackled over the radio from his headquarters in San Diego. "Charleston, this is Admiral Patterson. Please confirm your current status." "Admiral, this is Captain Rodriguez. All 4 engines are online and operating normally. We have full propulsion power and are maneuvering to avoid the storm. Chief Jackson has solved our problem." There was a pause before the Admiral responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of profound relief. "Outstanding work, Charleston. Chief Jackson, are you there?" Marcus took the radio from Captain Rodriguez. "Yes, sir, Admiral." The problem was contamination from cleaning solvents that left an invisible residue on the engine sensors. The sensors were giving false readings to the control computers, preventing normal startup sequences. "Chief, I want you to know that your solution is going to be documented and shared with the entire fleet. This type of contamination problem could potentially affect other vessels, and your diagnostic approach may prevent similar incidents in the future." As the Charleston began moving away from the storm, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond just solving a technical problem. He had proven that experience and intuition were still valuable in an age of advanced technology and computer diagnostics. Dr. Chen approached him with genuine admiration in her voice. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. When I first met you, I thought your methods were outdated compared to modern diagnostic techniques, but you found a problem that all our sophisticated equipment missed completely." Marcus smiled. "Ma'am, your equipment is excellent, and it told us exactly what was happening once we knew what to look for. The problem wasn't with your technology, it was that we needed to think outside the normal parameters to identify what was actually wrong." Chief Thompson gathered his engine room crew around Marcus for an impromptu celebration. The young sailors who had worked alongside him during the sensor cleaning process were looking at him with newfound respect and admiration. "Chief Jackson, how did you know to look at the cleaning solvents when nobody else even considered them?" asked Petty Officer Martinez, one of the younger engineers. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "Son, I've seen a lot of unusual problems over the years, and I've learned that the most difficult ones to solve are usually caused by something simple that happened recently." When Chief Thompson mentioned the thorough cleaning they had done, it reminded me of similar problems I'd encountered before. As the ship moved into calmer waters and away from the storm, Captain Rodriguez made an announcement over the ship's intercom system. He explained to the crew what had happened and acknowledged the contributions of everyone who had worked to solve the crisis. With special recognition for Marcus Jackson's crucial insight, the crew's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Sailors throughout the ship began seeking out Marcus to thank him personally and to hear about his Navy service. Many of them had never met a veteran from the earlier era of naval service, and they were fascinated by his stories of working on different types of ships and engines. Later that evening, as the USS Charleston sailed safely through calm seas under a clear sky, Marcus stood on the deck looking up at the stars. The storm that had threatened to destroy the ship was now far behind them, its lightning visible only as distant flashes on the horizon. Captain Rodriguez joined him at the rail. "Chief, I've been thinking about what happened today. We had some of the most brilliant engineering minds in the country working on this problem, using the most advanced diagnostic equipment available, yet it took a retired petty officer with a toolbox and 40 years of experience to find the solution." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Captain, those brilliant minds and that advanced equipment were essential to fixing the problem once we knew what it was. But sometimes you need someone who's seen enough failures to know where to look for the unexpected ones." 3 weeks after the USS Charleston incident, Marcus Jackson received an unexpected visitor at his marine repair shop in Alabama. Admiral Patterson had flown from San Diego to personally thank the man who had saved one of his ships and possibly prevented a major tragedy. Marcus was working on the engine of a local fishing boat when his wife Dorothy called out that he had a visitor. He wiped the grease from his hands and walked to the front of his shop where he found Admiral Patterson standing beside a black sedan. "Admiral, this is quite a surprise," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you again after that night on the Charleston." Admiral Patterson shook Marcus's hand warmly. "Chief, I had to come here personally to tell you what's happened since you solved our engine problem. Your discovery has had implications far beyond just one ship." The Admiral explained that after receiving Marcus's detailed report on the solvent contamination issue, the Navy had immediately begun testing other vessels that had used the same cleaning products. They discovered that 12 other ships in the fleet were experiencing similar sensor problems, though none as severe as the Charleston's complete engine failure. Your diagnostic approach has potentially prevented a dozen other mechanical failures that could have endangered ships and crews throughout the Pacific Fleet, the Admiral said. The Navy is revising its cleaning procedures and sensor maintenance protocols based on your findings. Marcus was pleased to hear that his work had helped other sailors, but he was somewhat uncomfortable with the attention he was receiving. "Admiral, I just did what needed to be done. Any experienced engineer would have eventually figured out the same thing." Admiral Patterson shook his head. "Chief, that's not true, and you know it. We had experienced engineers working on that problem for days. What you brought was something different. The ability to think beyond standard procedures and look at problems from angles that textbooks don't cover." The Admiral had brought with him a formal commendation from the Secretary of the Navy, recognizing Marcus's service in solving the Charleston crisis. The document praised his technical expertise, his innovative problem-solving approach, and his willingness to assist the Navy despite his retirement. "There's something else, Chief," the Admiral said. "The Navy wants to offer you a position as a senior civilian consultant. You would work with our engineering teams to help solve difficult mechanical problems and to train younger engineers in diagnostic techniques that can't be learned from books." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. The idea of returning to naval service, even as a civilian, brought back many memories, both positive and negative, from his years in uniform. Dorothy had been listening from the doorway of the shop, and she stepped forward to join the conversation. "Admiral, my husband served his country faithfully for 20 years, and he's been proud to help whenever the Navy needed him. But he's also built a good life here helping local fishermen and boat owners. Any decision about returning to naval work would need to respect the life we've built together." Admiral Patterson nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Jackson, I completely understand your concerns. The position would be flexible, allowing Chief Jackson to work from home much of the time and travel to naval facilities only when his expertise is specifically needed. We're not asking him to return to active duty or to relocate." Over the next hour, the Admiral outlined the details of the proposed consulting position. Marcus would provide technical advice on difficult engineering problems, review maintenance procedures, and occasionally visit ships or naval facilities to work on complex issues. Most importantly, he would help develop training programs to teach younger engineers the kind of practical problem-solving skills that had enabled him to solve the Charleston crisis. "The Navy has recognized that we may have become too dependent on technology and formal procedures," the Admiral explained. "We need people who can think creatively and look at problems from different perspectives. Your generation of engineers has knowledge and experience that we can't afford to lose." Marcus looked at his wife, and she nodded slightly, indicating her support for whatever decision he made. "Admiral, I'm honored by the offer and I'm willing to help however I can. But I have one condition." The Admiral listened carefully as Marcus explained his condition. He wanted the Navy to establish a scholarship program for young people from underserved communities who were interested in pursuing careers in marine engineering. The program would provide educational opportunities and mentorship for students who might not otherwise have access to technical training. Many of the sailors I worked with on the Charleston were young people who reminded me of myself when I first joined the Navy, Marcus said. They have talent and determination, but they need opportunities to develop their skills. If the Navy is serious about developing the next generation of engineers, we need to look for talent in places where it might be overlooked. Admiral Patterson immediately agreed to Marcus's condition. Chief, that's an excellent idea, and it's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need. I'll work with Naval Personnel Command to establish the scholarship program as part of your consulting arrangement. As the Admiral prepared to leave, he took one final moment to express his gratitude. Chief Jackson, when I called you that night, I was taking a chance on someone I remembered from years ago. I had no idea that decision would lead to solving not just one crisis, but potentially preventing many others. Marcus watched the Admiral's sedan disappear down the country road, then returned to his work on the fishing boat engine, but his mind was already thinking about the young sailors he had met on the Charleston and how he might help the next generation of engineers develop the skills and confidence to solve problems that hadn't been written about in any textbook. 6 months later, the Marcus Jackson Scholarship Program awarded its first grants to 12 high school students from across the country. The program provided full funding for technical education in marine engineering, along with mentorship opportunities and guaranteed internship positions with naval contractors. At the scholarship award ceremony, held at the Naval Academy, Marcus stood before an audience of naval officers, engineering students, and scholarship recipients. As he looked out at the diverse group of young people who would receive the scholarships, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond any personal recognition he had received. These young people represent the future of naval engineering, he said in his brief remarks. They bring fresh perspectives, innovative thinking, and the determination to solve problems that haven't even been identified yet. The Navy will be stronger because of their contributions. Admiral Patterson, who had worked tirelessly to establish the scholarship program, spoke about Marcus's continuing contributions as a naval consultant. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had helped solve 3 additional complex engineering problems and had developed training materials that were being used throughout the fleet. Chief Jackson has shown us that experience and wisdom are just as valuable as the latest technology, the Admiral said. His approach to problem-solving has become a model for how we train our engineers and maintain our ships. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus was approached by several of the scholarship recipients who wanted to thank him personally. Among them was a young woman from his home state of Alabama who planned to study marine engineering and eventually serve as a naval officer. Mr. Jackson, I want you to know that this scholarship is changing my life, she said. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to pursue engineering, but now I can follow in your footsteps and serve my country. Marcus smiled and shook her hand. Young lady, don't follow in my footsteps. Make your own path and solve problems that my generation never even imagined. That's how progress happens. That evening, as Marcus and Dorothy flew home to Alabama, he reflected on the unexpected turn his retirement had taken. What had started as an emergency call in the middle of the night had evolved into a second career and a legacy that would benefit young engineers for years to come. The USS Charleston was now sailing missions around the world with her, engines running perfectly, but more importantly, the lessons learned from that crisis were making the entire Navy stronger and more capable of handling future challenges.